Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Cuba Solidarity Campaign meeting, the revolution within the revolution, celebrating 60 years of the FMC. My name is Philippa Harvey, and I'm on the executive of the National Education Union, and also I'm currently the chair of the TUC Women's Committee. So I'll be chairing this meeting tonight, as well as the speakers that you'll see and hear from tonight in this meeting. We also have Ryan from the Cuba Solidarity Campaign hosting the meeting. So if there are any technical issues that come up this evening, he may just suddenly appear on your screen, but hopefully it should all go smoothly and we should have a fantastic meeting in front of us this evening. We should also have time for a few questions at the end of the meeting after we've heard from all our speakers, but we will be finishing by 8 o'clock this evening, and by which time hopefully it'll be slightly cooler than it already is this evening. So firstly, I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight. We have participants via the Zoom meeting that I can see in front of me here this evening, and others are watching live by YouTube at the moment too, including our friends from FMC in Cuba. So welcome to you all, especially everyone joining from Cuba. I'm waving to you all the way over in Cuba, and I'm sure if they can see the rest of us, we are all waving to you as well. I'd also like to welcome the Cuban ambassador, Her Excellency Barbara Montalvo Alvarez, who's joining us on Zoom. And we'd like to extend our congratulations and solidarity to the FMC on their 60th anniversary. Congratulations and solidarity to you all. The Federation of Cuban Women is just a few months younger than the Cuban Revolution itself, and was one of the first mass organizations established by the new government. With its first president, Vilma Espin, at its helm, it spearheaded equality programs and transformed the lives of women in Cuba. It genuinely was a revolution within a revolution. Next week, on the 23rd of August, we mark the 60th anniversary of the Federation of Cuban Women. And the CSC had planned to have a delegation from the FMC come to the UK in September to take part in a nationwide speaking tour. Now, unfortunately, we've had to delay this due to coronavirus. So I'm really delighted that our first contribution tonight will be from Teresa Amarelle Boué, who is the General Secretary of the Federation of Cuban Women, as well as a member of the Cuban National Assembly and the Council of State. It's important to point out here that Teresa's contribution is via a video interview that she recorded especially for us. Now, unfortunately, she can't join us through Zoom because the US blockade of Cuba means that Zoom isn't available to Cubans, which is just another example of how this policy impacts on all areas of Cuban life. The clip that we are going to play is 12 minutes long. It's an extract of a longer message that she's recorded for us. The full recording will be up on the CSC YouTube channel later this week. And if you want to see the whole interview, you can go and visit the YouTube channel later on this week. So we're now going to watch that interview.
Teresa Amarelle Boué, Secretaria General de la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas. La Federación de Mujeres Cubanas es una organización no gubernamental que funciona en nuestro país y que funciona además con respaldo constitucional, porque el artículo 14 de la Constitución de la República establece que el Estado tiene la obligación de respaldar el funcionamiento de nuestra organización y de otras que, como nosotras, también son organizaciones no gubernamentales que tienen iniciativa legislativa y que tienen también iniciativa de reforma en nuestra Constitución, es decir, que son respaldadas por la legislación en Cuba. Pero tenemos que decir que la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas como organización surgió de la voluntad de las mujeres cubanas. La voluntad de las mujeres cubanas cubanas que al triunfo de la revolución quisieron organizarse en una sola organización. Y fue así como más de 200 organizaciones que existían en aquel momento de mujeres en el país pidieron, a través de algunas de ellas, a nuestra querida Vilma Espín, en aquel momento guerrillera, en aquel momento combatiente del ejército rebelde, especialmente del segundo frente, también en la clandestinidad, le planteó al comandante en jefe, a nuestro querido Fidel Castro, que las mujeres querían hacer una organización de mujeres. Y Fidel valoró como muy revolucionario ese momento en que las mujeres querían hacer esa organización. Y a partir de ese momento se desplegó todo un trabajo en las comunidades para organizar la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas. Y es el 23 de agosto de 1960 que finalmente quedó constituida oficialmente nuestra organización. Repito, una organización con un amplio poder de convocatoria. Para nosotras hay dos fortalezas que son determinantes. Una, nuestras federadas, que es como le decimos en Cuba a las miembros de esta organización, que son personas mayores de 14, mujeres mayores de 14 años y que por voluntad propia quieran ingresar a la organización. Ya hoy podemos decir que 60 años después tenemos una integración del 91,7%, es decir, de todas las mujeres mayores de 14 años en Cuba, adolescentes, jóvenes, el 91,7% han decidido por su propia voluntad ser federadas. Por tanto, esa es, yo diría, que la fortaleza más importante que tenemos como organización. Pero tenemos otra gran fortaleza y es la manera en que estamos organizadas. Yo creo que para cualquier país tener organizadas a las mujeres como una fuerza decisiva es muy importante, pero estar organizadas además a nivel de comunidad es otra de las grandes fortalezas. Nosotras contamos con 81.000 organizaciones de base a nivel de comunidad y con 14.000 bloques, es como se llama la estructura, que es una estructura intermedia entre las organizaciones de base y los comités municipales con los que también contamos. Como organización tenemos objetivos que son por donde realizamos todos nuestros contenidos de trabajo. ¿Cuál es el primer objetivo de nuestra organización? La defensa de la Revolución Cubana. Porque la defensa de la revolución como un programa de igualdad, porque sin la revolución cubana, las cubanas no hubiéramos alcanzado la posición que hoy tenemos, porque fue precisamente la revolución la que comenzó a cambiar el concepto de lo femenino en nuestro país, y fue la revolución la que se propuso como primera meta eliminar la discriminación a la que estaban sometidas las mujeres en Cuba. Ese es nuestro objetivo, uno de nuestros principales objetivos. El otro objetivo, por supuesto, tiene que ver con la igualdad como proyecto de vida, como principio del Estado cubano, recogido también y refrendado por la Constitución de la República. Es nuestro propósito, la educación de las mujeres, la educación de la familia en esa cultura de igualdad que se viene ganando en la sociedad, porque no basta con las leyes, no basta con los programas, con las políticas públicas, si no trabajamos en la educación de nuestras mujeres. Y para ese trabajo educativo con nuestras mujeres, para que eleven su autoestima, es que contamos con estas organizaciones de base y con más de 400.000 activistas, porque somos una organización que trabajamos con activismo. Lo que tenemos es activismo. Y esas mujeres, es decir, que lo hacen de manera voluntaria, de manera por necesidad de ellas mismas, de querer contribuir, de querer aportar. Nosotros y nuestra presidenta por siempre, Vilma Espín, siempre reconocemos que somos, que hemos sido, además de beneficiarias de la obra de la revolución, también somos protagonistas, porque en la misma ha sido un proceso, digamos, dialéctico, en la misma manera en que la revolución nos aportó derechos, oportunidades, posibilidades, nosotras también aportamos a la revolución con esa capacidad transformadora que tenemos las mujeres, y con esa, las mujeres cubanas tenemos también una capacidad de resistencia y de imponernos ante las dificultades que hemos tenido. Por ejemplo, para las mujeres cubanas nada ha sido fácil fácil porque el bloqueo económico impuesto por el gobierno de Estados Unidos ha sido la mayor violación de los derechos humanos a la que hemos estado sometidas las mujeres cubanas. Y eso tiene un reflejo práctico en la vida cotidiana, en la vida de cada familia, en cada mujer. Y pudiéramos poner muchos ejemplos, sobre todo en las condiciones actuales, sobre todo ahora en el enfrentamiento a la pandemia. Estamos enfrentando un bloqueo que no es el bloqueo que conocíamos de hace 60 años, es un bloqueo mucho más recrudecido, mucho más cruel, es un bloqueo que abarca ya, que sobrepasa la situación comercial, financiera, económica. Es una agresión también a la subjetividad de las personas. Ahí están los ejemplos desde el punto de vista material, como por ejemplo las situaciones y las limitaciones que tenemos en el sector de la salud. Nosotros tenemos un programa importante en Cuba, que es el programa de reproducción asistida. Tenemos centros de alta tecnología y tenemos más de 1000 parejas infértiles que quieren tener y que forma parte de su proyecto tener hijos. Sin embargo, el país no puede acceder a reactivos y equipamientos de alta tecnología de primera generación porque precisamente el bloqueo nos lo está impidiendo. Pero tenemos también la situación, digamos, por ejemplo, de los alimentos. Cuba tiene que salir a comprar sus alimentos a otros continentes, a otros en lugares muy distantes, pagando el flete y pagando todo lo que eso representa, y además con el riesgo de que cuando esos productos lleguen pudieran correr algún peligro de que estén en mal estado o algo así, a partir precisamente de ese cruel bloqueo a lo que estamos siendo sometidos, que no es solamente en la salud, no es solamente en la educación, que es también en el sector empresarial, en los medicamentos. ¿Cuántos medicamentos hoy escasean en Cuba? Y esa situación es debido fundamentalmente a que tenemos que adquirir materias primas que proceden del mercado de Estados Unidos, y como está prohibido que todo producto que tenga hasta un 10% de componentes norteamericanos, nosotros no lo podemos adquirir. Así hubo que paralizar aviones que teníamos contratados con otros países, afectando la transportación de nuestro pueblo internamente y también hacia otros países. La migración, por ejemplo, es otro de los elementos que decía que sobrepasa a veces lo comercial, lo financiero, y tiene que ver con la subjetividad, porque muchas de nuestras familias no pueden unirse, no pueden verse, no pueden compartir momentos de alegría o de tristeza porque se lo impiden, porque tienen que ir a terceros países, porque cerraron las oficinas consulares en Cuba, y entonces nuestro pueblo tiene que ir a otros países para poder hacer los trámites de visado. Ahora la misma agresión que están teniendo contra nuestro personal de la salud, que desinteresadamente Cuba ha prestado ayuda a otros países del mundo, y ha sido siempre una vocación humanista de nuestro pueblo. Siempre ha sido así. Podemos mencionar, por ejemplo, en el año 60, triunfando la revolución prácticamente, en el momento en que se creó nuestra organización, ya Cuba brindó ayuda solidaria cuando el terremoto de Chile en el año 60, y ahí fueron mujeres nuestras federadas ya, o fueron mujeres a compartir, a brindar su ayuda solidaria. Pero también lo hemos hecho en otros momentos, y recientemente la OMS, la Organización Mundial de la Salud, le otorgó el premio de la salud a nuestra brigada Henry Rich. Esas brigadas, por ejemplo, en este momento están compuestas por un 61% de nuestras mujeres, y eso tiene mucho que ver con esa vocación humanista, desinteresada, altruista, que está incorporada en nuestra manera de actuar. Entonces es muy duro escuchar las acusaciones y las ofensas que le hacen a nuestro pueblo y sobre todo a nuestras mujeres, porque así lo sentimos nosotros. Yo quería específicamente agradecer a todos los movimientos de mujeres y a la solidaridad de Gran Bretaña con nuestro país por todas las muestras de cariño, de respeto, de solidaridad que han tenido para con nuestro pueblo y específicamente para con nuestra organización por nuestro 60 aniversario. Las veces que han apoyado y han respaldado al pueblo, porque realmente es al pueblo cubano, en las votaciones que se hacen en la ONU por el bloqueo, y si hemos podido reputación que muchas veces es por parte de ellos traicionera, si hemos vencido ha sido precisamente por esa solidaridad, por lo que se lo agradecemos infinitamente, ese apoyo, ese respaldo. Ahora mismo estamos teniendo un apoyo y un respaldo, unas propuestas que salen de la solidaridad para que a nuestros médicos se les otorgue el Premio Nobel de la Paz. De todas formas, yo creo que ese Premio Nobel, nuestro personal de la salud ya lo logró, y el solo hecho de que ustedes lo hayan pensado, el solo hecho de que otros países también se hayan sumado, esa cantidad de personas que en el mundo han recibido el cariño, la atención médica, los servicios que prestan nuestros trabajadores de la salud, yo creo que es el mayor premio que puedan tener nuestros médicos, que además nos lo pidieron, que es precisamente esa solidaridad y ese reconocimiento a ese papel que ellos han desempeñado, que ha hecho que se cree este movimiento en el mundo. Así que en nombre de 4 millones de mujeres, que es lo que representamos, agradecemos esa solidaridad y le pedimos que confíen en nosotros, que confíen en la fuerza de las mujeres cubanas, en la lealtad a nuestro sistema. Nosotras respetamos y somos leales, fieles a este sistema político, que es el que ha logrado que la posición y la condición de las mujeres haya cambiado en la sociedad cubana. Un abrazo, un beso de todas las mujeres cubanas, y les decimos que aquí estaremos siempre en defensa de la igualdad de derechos y oportunidades de las mujeres.
Thank you so much, Teresa, and thank you to the FMC for that message. It's clear that Cuba has gained so much strength from the women of Cuba, as well as giving so much strength to the women of Cuba. It's like a circle, and that comes clearly through that message that we've just received. Although representatives from the FMC are not able to join us on Zoom, I know that because we've been live broadcasting this meeting to them on YouTube, they are watching from Cuba now. So once again, congratulations and solidarity from us all. We have 180 people watching across both YouTube and Zoom, and Dania and Gretel from FMC are watching, and we do send our solidarity and greetings to you, and wish you and congratulations and best wishes to you on this on the upcoming anniversary. And thank you so much, Trace, for that message that you have sent us. Our second speaker tonight is Medea Benjamin, who's joining us live from Washington, DC in the US. Medea is the co-founder of the US women-led peace group Code Pink, and the co-founder of the human rights group Global Exchange. She's been an advocate for social justice for more than 40 years and is the author of 3 books on Cuba. Code Pink is also coordinating the current international campaign toward the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize to the Cuban medical brigades working in 35 countries around the world to help fight COVID-19. Welcome, Medea. I think we need to,
yes.
We've got you unmuted.
Yes,
welcome.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be invited to speak. And I just love Teresa's address. She touched all the points I was going to say. It's quite remarkable, the work of the FMC. And maybe I should just give some personal stories about that, because I lived in Cuba in the early 80s. In fact, I got married in Cuba, and it was soon after the family code had been passed. And I'll never forget being before the judge and the judge starting reading from the family code about how the husband has to do the housework, do the child care. This is a 50-50 deal that they were getting into, and then stopping and looking right in his eyes and saying, do you understand what I'm saying? Is this sinking in? This is a partnership. It doesn't matter if you're working and she's not, or whatever it is, it's a 50-50 deal. And I remember how remarkable that was. Unfortunately, when you get back to the reality of the home, in my case, for example, his mother was horrified at the idea that he should be doing half the housework. Many of his unenlightened friends were horrified at the idea. So things have progressed quite a lot over the years, where Cuban men have become more and more partners in equal partners. But just like, I don't know, the British society, but certainly here in the United States, there is still what's referred to in Cuba as the doble jornada, the double work that women then have to go home and face because men in most countries are not doing their fair share. And I think this becomes more evident in coronavirus, where at least in the US, children are at home and there is so much more work to be done by the family. But going back to a minute from my experiences, I did have my first child in Cuba, and I was attended to unbelievably by the healthcare system, and then had paid pregnancy leave, then had leave whenever my child was sick, and also had the best daycare that I could imagine. And these kind of things are in addition to a community in Cuba where people just naturally love children and want to help take care of children. I contrast that to having my second child back in the United States, where I was looking around and saying, where is the community? Where is the child care center? Where is the paid leave? I didn't have any of that. And it is remarkable looking at that Cuban healthcare system when you see you in the UK have a nationalized healthcare system that's being frayed. We in the US have a disastrous, you can't even call it a healthcare system, where we are suffering so much now from coronavirus and don't see any end in sight. And Cuba is one of the safest places in the world right now. Even though there's been a very recent spike in coronavirus, I would still prefer to being in Cuba than being where I am now, where we are feeling a tremendous sense of fear and hopelessness. The Cuban healthcare system runs on a fraction of the costs that we spend on our healthcare systems in the European countries and in the US, and yet has healthcare statistics that are comparable, if not better, than in our countries. It is one of the most safest places to give birth because of the very low maternal mortality. It's one of the safest places to be a child because of the very low infant mortality, child mortality, the very low level of violence. And you don't have the problem in Cuba of the kind of violent gun society where children are being killed all the time in our societies. And you also have a life expectancy that is quite remarkable given how poor a country in financial resources it is. 77 years for the average and going close to 79 years for Cuban women. So it is remarkable what an educational system that is free for all and a healthcare system that is universal is able to do in terms of bettering the lives of women in Cuba. Just as Teresa from the FMC had talked about, there are hardships, many of them caused by the embargo, and I'll go back to that, but recognizing there are hardships living in a poor Caribbean island. There are hardships of mistakes that the government makes. There are hardships of Mother Nature that has devastated Cuba with hurricanes over the years. There are hardships with things like dengue fever and now coronavirus. And these shortages have made life difficult for women in many ways. The shortages of food and medicine, meaning that women have to stand on long lines, that there are difficulties in transportation, difficulties in housing, and living in the United States. I do want to spend a moment talking about the embargo because it is weighs so heavy on the hearts of those who care about Cuba to know that our government is causing this kind of hardship for the Cuban people. There was so much hope under the Obama administration when relations were restored, when we could go to Cuba without facing penalties, and when the Cuban people thought that this would help alleviate the most recent crisis that came with the lack of the government of Venezuela to keep supporting Cuba to the level that it had been because of the drop in the price of oil. And so when Trump came in and turned all of this around, it has been so difficult to see this reflected in Cuba, and to know in the United States, the reason is the US politics, where it's an election year, where Florida is an important state, where the Cuban Americans, even though it's the older generation that doesn't reflect the younger generation anymore, they still have tremendous power, and they are able to run Cuba policy. We see how Bernie Sanders was attacked for saying that Cuba has a good healthcare system. We see that the Congresswoman Karen Bass was probably taken off the list for being a vice president because she had in the past said positive things and expressed condolences when Fidel Castro was killed. I mean, this died, sorry. This is absolutely insane that such a small group can run US policy towards Cuba and have repercussions on the national scale. But it only means that we in the United States have to work harder, get more organized, and be more effective in confronting this small group of right-wing Cuban Americans. On the positive side, I want to say that there is now a new group that's been formed called ASERE that is calling for establishing relations of respect with Cuba. And we have now over 100 organizations that have signed on to the first thing we did, which was to support amendments that would ease the restrictions on food and medicine, and support an amendment that would lift the restrictions on the amount of money that Cuban Americans can send to their relatives back in Cuba. We look forward to building this group ASERE to be stronger and to get more of the Congress people to be forced to speak up during this pandemic, to recognize how cruel it is to be causing this additional hardship on the Cuban people. And finally, I want to echo what Teresa mentioned about the Nobel Peace Prize, because I'm one of the two co-founders, co-chairs in the US of the effort to nominate Cuba for the 2021 Peace Prize. We would love for you to go to the website. It's cubannobel.org. Sign up if you haven't signed already, and help us to get a lot more than the 30,000 people we have signed up already. As Teresa said, it's also just horrific to see how the US government and even groups like Human Rights Watch are discrediting that beautiful, beautiful program of sending doctors around the world to help fight coronavirus by calling this a program of human trafficking and saying that it's a modern day form of slavery. This is so absolutely disgusting. They say because the doctors don't get their full salaries and they have restrictions on what they can do when they're in those countries, that means that it's a form of slavery. We know that the portion of the salary that goes to the Cuban government is going to support the healthcare system, and Cuban doctors are so proud they can do that. We know they also do this out of altruism because they care about the world and they're putting their lives at risk to help others. So it is really just awful to hear the kind of sabotage that the US has been doing against this campaign. And it's all the more reason that we have to build up this effort to show what a small resource poor country can do, to show the rest of the world what we could be doing if we put our resources towards helping people around the world, towards cooperating and showing what international solidarity looks like. So thank you very much. Again, congratulations to the Federation of Cuban Women for your incredible work over 60 years and the example that you show for women around the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Medea. And just to say that details of the Nobel campaign are on the Cuba Solidarity Campaign website. And CSC are an endorser of that campaign, and we are collecting messages of support messages from supporters in Parliament and the British Trade Union movement, which we'll be posting over the coming weeks. Please do sign the Nobel petition, as Medea said, and share details of it with people you know to get as many signatories for that as possible. And also, if you haven't already, sign the CSE petition to the British government around asking them to pressure the US to suspend the blockade to allow medical supplies into Cuba to help fight the coronavirus at home as well. So just to echo all those pleas that Medea did, and to say that all those details are available. Our next speaker is Miriam Palacios. Miriam is a Cuban science researcher and academic based in London. She's a chair of Academic Studies Caribbean Applied Science and Technology, which promotes scientific knowledge sharing between the Caribbean, Britain, and Europe. And although Miriam has been based in the UK now for the past few years, she is going to give a personal account of her experience growing up in Cuba, joining the FMC shortly after it was established. And she's also going to talk about her experience of being a scientist in Cuba and in the UK. Welcome, Miriam, and we're looking forward to that. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Good evening, comrades and friends of Cuba, Cuba Solidarity Campaign and comrades in Cuba. Thank you for this opportunity for sharing unforgettable time in my life at the beginning of the revolution. I am old enough to remember the sense of freedom, the sense of change in my town in January 1959, when Fidel Castro and the Revolutionary Army crossed the town in the way to the center of Havana. And what I couldn't imagine in that time is what was expecting for the women in the revolution. I just saw the moment, the euphoria of people for change and freedom. And later on, I was aware of the Federation of Cuban Women because the first and all subsequent meetings took place in my house. Even when I was not old enough to be member of the FMC, they allowed me to be part of the meeting. And little by little, they gave me small tasks like reading materials, educational materials in the meetings, taking message for the houses of the women for the next meeting, sometimes collecting money, different things that although I was under age, I felt part of the organization and they nurtured me. That later on allowed me to get one of the most important moments of my life, and I owe to the Federation of Cuban Women to be part or was part of that movement for a literacy campaign. And I want to share with you the medal I received later for that moment in my life. Today, reflecting on how those days in the beginning of the Federation of the Cuban Women, I discovered that those white women in my neighborhood that I never saw outside their home went to the meeting with strong voices, with enormous idea, with an enormous enthusiasm for transformation, for being part of something big in society. And today, reflecting on that, it could easily, in that time, went to the wrong way if they didn't exist the mechanism to link and articulate that movement, to harness that energy and infinite enthusiasm, to deliver the task that the revolution needs, and then feedback of the achievement that the Federation of Women got for the revolution. For instance, and I will say one of the first, was the national campaign for the vaccination against polio in 1961, that Cuba became in 1962 the first country in Latin America free of poliomyelitis. And that was the big success, that women themselves felt proud of that. And at those days, I was one of the children that took the vaccine. That was a little candy that we took and be part of that. And I worked with the FMC as the target population, the children that received the vaccine, but at the same time, helping them in that organization. As I said before, one of the big points in my life was being allowed on to the Federation of Women, in the Cuban Women, to be part of that movement was the Campaña de Alfabetización, or what we recognize here, the campaign of literacy. And the women, Cuban Women Federation, they recognize two important principles in that campaign. First, if the literacy exists, due to literacy workers exist. Also, if the one who knows more should teach those who know less. And these two principles were enough to allow me, with 9 years old, be part of the community brigade to teach the workers in San Francisco de Paula that were building a supermarket. Because literacy in Cuba was very high and was not only in the rural of Cuba. All my cousins in those days that were in secondary school participate in the campaign in the countryside. But I was not allowed because I was not in secondary school, but enough, and I have proof already by my readings in the meeting, that I was able to have the discipline and commitment to do this task. Remembering the word of Fidel in December 22nd, 1961, is what made me the next big moment of my life. And his word in part of the speech was, onward, comrades, onward to new goals, to meet new commitments, to train as a technician, doctors, teachers, engineers, and revolutionary intellectuals. That was in 1961. After that, I became full member of the FMC, member of the Comité of the Defensa de la Revolución, CDR, Committee for the Defense of the Revolution, a member of the Union of the Communist Party. I got a scholarship, study secondary school, and in 1975, I graduated from University of Havana and became my first step towards scientist. And again, was the solidarity of the women at work, united by the solidarity of the Federation of Cuban Women, who found a place for my child, because at that time I was a mother, to be in one of those nursery for children. Then I can join the research group led by a foreign expert, and then contribute with my effort to advance the pharmaceutical industry, where was the place I had my first job. But the life in my institution of my work was a new place of learning, mainly women that work looking after laboratory animals. And those women came from different sectors. We were the first promotion of high educated to be part of that laboratory. And what we organized in collaboration with the union and was a system in which those that achieve higher education would pass knowledge, and at the same time we receive the wisdom of those workers that were before, some of them servants, domestic servants, some of them were peasants in the countryside, but then the experience, the rich experience of their life before revolution was appreciated by us. And the less we can do was to build their capacity, to improve their skills, by which they also have increase in their salary. Then I was in an environment surrounded by women leaders that were guiding me and at the same time making me aware of my responsibility in society. Then I became a scientist and went to this devoted life of working long hours in science, as everybody knows. But my experience in here from 1994 to 2011, unfortunately, was very different than what I had in Cuba. I was always surrounded by leaders in Cuba, women leaders, that helped me to grow and helped me to improve my career. I have also the support of my mother, who was a very revolutionary woman, who looked after my children when I need to go abroad for short training. And every time I came back from those trainings, I passed to the community of my work and even to a bigger community outside of my work, the knowledge I learned in those short-term trainings abroad. That built, and I am sure from the word of Teresa, is the strength that still is alive in the Cuban society. The resistance, the commitment to the principles we are very clear, the desire to do everything to take forward our revolution and to pass that knowledge to others, to other countries, to other developing countries. The reality here was different. I found that there was not an environment of female leaders. And there was no program, as I had in Cuba, to further your development in science. And of course, I could be maybe the very small environment where I used to work, which was University College London, but maybe it's not in other places. But if I look, how is women scientists represented in the position of science in this country, we find that the two different approaches, the Cuban and the British, reach different results. We have very small representation of women in, for instance, in the Royal Society, while in Cuba, there is a big representation of women in the Cuban Academy of Science. And that is something just very quickly that you see the consequence of a process growing and building the confidence of women that we are equal in science, we are equal in the discoveries of things, and we are devoted to the effort that science requires. However, maybe since, because I worked at UCL until 2011, and maybe things have changed. Now, I really was very happy when I realized that a young professor at UCL, Rebecca Chipley, is Vice Dean of the Faculty of Mechanical Engineering, and is also the director of the Center of Healthcare and Engineering. she's a woman, she's a mother, and I am proud that it's happened, and maybe it's more to come. Maybe it's a revolution coming through Britain. But it is sad because that support is needed. I have to work. I think that I have given to other women what I received from all the women in Cuba. I encourage a student of PhD here, women, to continue to think that doing the PhD is not a step for them later going and do nothing. And I think that is doing what the FMC did for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. That was really interesting and really fascinating to hear your personal testimony from your journey, and to hear the influence of the many women that you met, and the early days of the FMC and the impact that it's had on your life. And I think we can all learn a lot. Not clearly you've learned a lot, but we can all learn a lot as well. And you talked about the literacy campaign, and we're actually going to now show a short film on that looks at the impact of the literacy brigades and the impact it had on women's lives in Cuba. I know many of us and many of you will know about that campaign and the 100,000 volunteers that helped the country eradicate illiteracy within 1 year, with over 50% of those volunteers being very young women whose participation in those brigades had a really liberating effect, as Miriam talked about, and many returned empowered with a new sense of confidence and self-esteem. There is a great film about this called Maestro, which we're going to show just a 3-minute clip from now. And as you're watching it, you can sort of match it to what Miriam was talking about. So enjoy.
Thank you.
Éramos 3 compañeras, Aurelia, Hernández, Aide Muñoz y la que les habla, Daisy Beitía. Bueno, yo estudiaba en el preuniversitario y entonces me enteré, hicieron un llamado por la AJR que empezaba en ese momento, que quien le interesaba ir a alfabetizar a la zona, a las regiones orientales. Y me anoté en una planilla y me llamaron enseguida. Fui del primer llamado, de los primeros que fueron a alfabetizar, el primer llamado. Trabajar en Manatí. En Manatí, en lo que es el central Argelia Libre, pero de Manatí en una colonia cañera grandísima, que había muchas personas que eran analfabetos, bastantes personas. A mí sí sirvió mucho porque me subió o me elevó mucho la autoestima mío personal, ¿no? Que eso es muy importante en la vida.
En ese tiempo tenía 15 años, acababa de cumplir mis 15 años. Mi prima ya era maestra en ese tiempo y sirvió un poco como guía de nosotros, por lo que nos autorizaron a mí y a mi hermana también, aunque era más chiquita que yo, a alfabetizar. Mi papá era sastre, mi mamá modista, que quería haber sido bioquímica. Me gustaban hacer los experimentos, siempre estaba experimentando con pomitos y cosas. Ellos me decían que no podía soñar de esa manera porque ellos no tenían posibilidad de costearme esos estudios. Era mi primera salida de la casa, era mi primera sensación de un tanto de libertad, es decir, lo cual hacía que sintiera una manera de vivir diferente. Y le empecé a coger amor a esa especie de independencia. La ubicación fue en la finca Les Pois, en Aguacate, muy cerca de Ramón de las Yaguas, que es ir a una casa, alfabetizar a un señor llamado José María, que no sabía nada, y me llevé esa satisfacción de lograr en un tiempo que él pusiera su nombre, que conociera las letras, que es esa emoción, ¿no?, de ver un logro de un trabajo interesante en poco tiempo. Y estábamos ahí con ese lápiz grande, agarrado, que fue como se desfiló en La Habana, en la Plaza de la Revolución, que desfilamos con un lápiz como mostrando el triunfo de la enseñanza. Y fue un evento de una fuerza enorme, ¿no? Porque éramos tantas mujeres y hombres alfabetizadores, jóvenes, todos, que me quedó, ¿no?, ese recuerdo. Me quedan años y que suceda alguna otra cosa, pero hasta hoy, en mis recientes 58 años cumplidos el 22 de mayo, no tengo otra cosa con una fuerza tan grande como esa y que me evoque a su vez, cuando comienzo a hablar de ella, me evoca para la historia de mi vida las cosas más importantes que he realizado.
I have to say, watching that film, even the short clip of it again, brings back such good memories of going to visit the Museum of Literacy in Havana. You can watch the whole of the film it's available on the from CSE, and details of it on the website. I was lucky enough to go and visit the museum on one of the delegations when I went with the National Education Union. With Cuba Solidarity in 2017, and it was a real treat. And as a teacher, to go there, I'm almost speechless with what it gave us as a group of teachers to feel that. And our next speaker is also a member of one of those delegations who's been. And I know that all of us who've been on those delegations come back fired up with so much enthusiasm and inspiration to come back. And I think we all want to change the world. So I'm sure that Julie Walters-Nisbet is going to tell you about how she would like to change the world after the women that she has met there. Welcome, Julie. Julie, I think we need to unmute you.
Yes, Tom.
There you go.
Thank you. Good evening. Like you said, that clip brought back lots of memories. And like you said, Philippa, I think it was one of the best CPDs I've ever been on as a teacher since starting my career quite early on. I was part of the delegation that visited Cuba in October 2018. And what really struck me and some of my colleagues here in Leicester is that most of the school leadership we encountered in Cuba was Black female leadership. Okay, they were passionate, they were vibrant, they were expressive, not just in their speech, but in the way that they dressed. None of this grey suit business that we have here in the UK. The leadership, they were leaders. The women were leaders in the primary schools, in the secondary schools, in the special needs schools, in the music schools, and in the universities. Over the last few months during the COVID pandemic, here in the UK, we've also seen an increase in the awareness of the issues surrounding Black people here in the UK and Black teachers and Black nurses. And one of the programs that I watched on the BBC 2 weeks ago said only 1% of leadership in schools here in the UK are Black staff. And that really resonated with me in contrast to the experience that we saw in Cuba. Over the last 2 years since visiting Cuba, myself and my colleagues, we experience these daily microaggressions, the sort of institutional racism, and then being a female of a certain age, there also comes ageism. Okay, so whilst on the trip, quite a senior member in the NEU exec said to us, "What you're talking about, ladies, it sounds like constructive dismissal." And I'd never heard that terminology before until we were on the trip. And, you know, when we started sharing our collective experience, we realized, yes, that's what it was. Women over the age of 40. I know one of your speakers talked about childcare being so freely given in Cuba. And I remember us asking the parents in the special needs schools, how do you get time to come in for the reviews? Because they're encouraged to come in at least once a week to talk about targets for their young people with the teachers. And they looked at us like we were gone mad, because obviously it was time to spend on their children's education, and the expectation was that their employers would support that time to spend on their children's education, which we as teachers quite often find it really hard to get out of schools to be involved in our own children's education. So whilst we had this sort of utopic experience in Cuba, where we saw, you know, Black teachers excelling in leadership, we saw Black staff in everywhere we went, including the FDC, it was a real contrast for us. And in this particular delegation in October 2018, there were 10 Black staff, okay, 2 of which were male and 8 of which were female. In keeping in touch since we've come back to the UK, 4 out of my 8 female colleagues have literally been fighting to keep their jobs through multiple observations, work scrutinies, refusal of CPD, restructures. And again, the striking contrast really hits home. In Cuba, what we experienced was that the mature female and mature male staff were encouraged to stay on in schools, to mentor young staff joining the profession, and also to be involved in the national re-evaluation of the curriculum, which seemed to occur every 3 to 4 years. So that experience was really valued and, you know, not degraded because they didn't necessarily have as much physical strength as they did when they started teaching. Pre-COVID-19 in March this year, teaching was feeling like a little bit of a disrespected profession here in the UK. And approximately 400 teachers per month were leaving the profession. Lots of those Black staff who no longer had the good fight left in them. I'm hoping that one good thing that will come out of this pandemic and the huge amounts of homeschooling that's been going on across the country is that there will be a renewed respect for teachers in the profession and the roles that they support in school in terms of young people's education and development. Here in Leicester, we have tried to mimic what we saw in Cuba. We have a Black Teachers Association within our local branch of the Leicester City NEU. We organise theatre trips and comedy trips and things to help people with their health and well-being. And our wider associates in East Midlands have actually got a health and well-being event coming up next Saturday afternoon to help teachers to prepare mentally and physically for the return to school. So I am hoping that, if nothing else, from our Cuba delegation, we learned about how women support one another, whether that's with their home environments, with their CPD, with their research, especially during this COVID time where we sort of were passing advice from one another about, you know, as an ethnic minority, I need to be taking vitamin D supplements. They've said that will help us in the prevention and in the immunity against COVID. So I'm hoping that as we go forward, we find some renewed respect for teaching, for Black staff in schools and the microaggressions that they've been experiencing. I was recently watching a documentary on Channel 4, and it was about the experience of Black nurses here in the UK who'd largely come from the West Indies in the 1950s and 60s. And I said to my colleague, she was WhatsApping me at the time, if I close my eyes, I can hear Black teachers speaking. the lack of promotion, the lack of professional development, working extra hard to meet that same pay grade. So I want to congratulate the Federation of Women in Cuba. What we saw was truly inspirational. It renewed us, renewed our belief in the system of education. We saw how happy the young people were to learn, and we saw the strength of the girls right the way up through the senior leadership in the Federation. And I therefore want to congratulate them on their anniversary.
Thank you, Julie. Julie's also taking on leadership roles in the union as well, because she is the Vice President of Leicester District NEU. So she's taking on both leadership in the union as well, which is an important thing to do. And she is one of the co-authors of a chapter, and this is a book about the experiences of people who've been on the delegation beyond the blockade, and you can get copies of this through the CSC website. So lots of interesting information through that, and congratulations on the work that you've done through this book as well, Julie, and thank you very much for that contribution. So our final speaker tonight is Elaine Smith, who's joining us from Scotland. Elaine has been a member of the Scottish Parliament for the Labour Party since 1999. She's the convener of the cross-party group on Cuba and has been the Deputy Presiding Officer, Shadow Cabinet Secretary for Eradication of Poverty and Inequality, and is currently Business Manager in charge of the Whip's office. Welcome, Elaine, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thanks very much, Philippa, and good evening, comrades and sisters. I'm very pleased to have been asked to address the meeting tonight to mark the 60th anniversary of the Federation of Cuban Women, which will be coming up on the 23rd of August. It's an important event, I think, to help raise awareness of Cuban issues in general, but obviously more specifically those impacting on women. And it also allows us to draw comparisons with women in Scotland and Britain and women in Cuba, and that's what I would like to address much of my remarks to. But it also helps us to foster alliances and come together in an atmosphere of solidarity with our Cuban sisters. So I want to thank the Cuba Solidarity Campaign for organising it, and for everyone who's joined the event this evening. It's unfortunate, of course, that women from the FMC can't join us because of the cruel US blockade preventing them from accessing Zoom meetings, but it's great that we had a pre-recorded message from Teresa, and as we're broadcasting live on YouTube, could I just send greetings, solidarity and congratulations from Scotland via that medium. And I've also put down a motion in the Scottish Parliament to celebrate the anniversary, and I think that's been put up on the Facebook page as well. So you mentioned that I was the convener of the cross-party group, and I first joined that cross-party group when it was set up in the first session of the Scottish Parliament, and I've now been the convener of it for 17 years. I was elected to Parliament in 1999, and that followed a concerted effort by the Scottish Labour Party to increase women's representation. What we did was a system of twinning constituencies, and at the end of that, after the election, Labour had 50-50 women's representation. And I have to say that I very much doubt if I would have been an MSP if Labour hadn't taken those steps to have that twinning process. My motivation for putting myself forward for election as a socialist at that time was firmly rooted in a desire to see more women in our parliaments. And when I was interviewed by the party as a potential candidate, I recall the words that I began my pitch with, and they were, in 1918, the suffragettes won votes for women. 80 years later, 82% of MPs are men. Now, I don't recall the rest of the speech in detail, but I know I went on to argue strongly the need to see an increase in women parliamentarians. So following the election results in 1999, the Scottish Parliament had 37% women. That was the third best in the world at that time. And I recall that Cuba was 13th, because I often did those comparisons. But But what was remarkable was that in that one day in 1999, we elected more women to the Scottish Parliament than had been elected to represent Scotland in the House of Commons since 1918. So the whole, in one day in total, more than had been elected to the House of Commons at that time. But unfortunately, we have since struggled to advance towards true parity of representation. Scotland is now in 34th place with 36% women, slightly better than the UK, currently at 32%, and in 38th place. However, they seem to have dramatically improved, while Holyrood has dramatically decreased. And Cuba, of course, now has the second highest percentage of women parliamentarians in the world at 53.2%. So quite a remarkable turnaround from 1999 with those comparisons. In the Council of State in Cuba, it's 45% compared to 26% in the UK Cabinet. And the Cabinet in Scotland is slightly better off with over 50% women, but worryingly only 28% of the special advisors are women, and it is they who drive government policy and priorities, so that is an issue. In Cuba, at the provincial assembly level, it's just over 48% representation of women, and in the local authorities councils in Scotland and the UK, we have 33% in the UK and only 29% in Scotland. When we look at the Cuban women who preside over 10 of the country's 15 provincial assemblies and occupy the vice presidency in 7 of them, then we can see, I think, that we clearly need to refocus on strategies for greater women's participation and representation in Scotland and in the UK. And there's no doubt that these electoral achievements in Cuba can be traced back to the legacy of the policies introduced in the early days of the revolution, but importantly thereafter, the hard work of the FMC. Women's equality was and is at the heart of the revolution, and the establishment of the FMC in 1960, I think, very much showed a commitment to this. Of course, increasing women's representation is not just for its own sake, but it's because a critical mass of women in parliaments particularly can make a practical difference through the policies and the laws that improve women's lives. So, for example, in Scotland, in the early years of our parliament, we focused on violence against women and girls, and that resulted in policies to tackle it. And the spectrum of violence included domestic abuse and also issues such as pornography and prostitution. We also had other laws and policies primarily aimed at women. My own breastfeeding bill, for example, to protect mothers and babies' right to breastfeed in public, became law in 2005, and I am quite sure that that would have had little chance of success in a parliament without a critical mass of women members. My current proposed bill on the right to food has women at its heart because we've seen very much in focus recently how austerity and hunger always hits women the hardest. In Cuba, there's been many achievements in relation to government commitment to women's welfare and spending on health and education, which have had a major impact on indicators for women. And Medea mentioned some of these in her speech at the very beginning of this meeting. And some of the examples that we have are Save the Children, who consistently place Cuba first among developing countries for the well-being of mothers and children. The Overseas Development Institute rates Cuba in the top 20 nations for its progress on Millennium Development Goals. The World Economic Forum in the 2020 Global Gender Gap Report ranked Cuba 31st out of 151 countries. And Cuba has 0.02 maternal mortality rate, which is the lowest in Latin America, and over 80 years life expectancy for women, and that's higher than the US. It's undoubtedly the impact of a government which committed to investing in health and education, which makes such a huge impact in women's lives. And Cuba has the highest government spending on social services in Latin America, with the government spending 51% of its national budget on education, health and social welfare. There are also constitutional commitments to free education and healthcare, which we know, and these were cornerstones in the effort to build a more equal society after the revolution. And according to Save the Children's State of the World's Mothers report, and I quote, educating girls is the most effective means of improving the well-being of women and children. And we heard Teresa at the start talking about that issue. So education and literacy also are the foundation of running successful public health campaigns. And although health achievements benefit all Cubans, many of the country's acclaimed policies are specifically directed at women, including on maternal infant care, detection of cervical cancer and family doctors and nurse programmes. And that system, along with Cuba's other social policies, has produced really good strides in maternal and child health. If you look at the healthcare system, the rates of infant mortality has been lowered to 4 in every 1,000. That's lower than Canada, the US and Mexico. And on that, Scotland is in a slightly better position than Cuba, but considering the difference in wealth, then that's not surprising. But it might be of interest to note the degree of health inequality in Scotland, which exists despite our good position in world rankings. So the challenge, I think, for us here in Scotland is the inequalities in life expectancy and quality of life. And these have started to widen again even before the pandemic. So, for example, there's more than 20 years difference in life expectancy between more affluent and more deprived parts of Scotland. So in the West End of Glasgow, more affluent area, it's 83 for women, and in the East End, it's 72, and that really is a shocking difference. A commitment to sex equality, of course, is guaranteed in Cuba's constitution and laws. And since 1997, there's been a government plan for the advancement of women, and that means that all ministries have a responsibility to ensure that their policies advance women's equality and well-being and report annually to the FMC on what they've done to meet the plan. So I would say it's apparent in Scotland that there is a lack of an overarching strategy for women, and that's often led to individual members of parliament having to propose important legislation for women rather than government itself doing so. We could very much learn from Cuba's example here. And drawing my remarks to a close, I was thinking about the many cross-party group meetings that we'd had over the years, and I think amongst the most memorable was an address by Aleida Guevara in the Scottish Parliament. Also an event at the Festival of Politics where we had speeches, music and importantly rum. And then of course the visit by the delegation from the FMC just over 10 years ago. And unfortunately, as we've heard, the visit this year has been halted by the coronavirus. Chair, I'll be standing down in March, but I really hope that comrades will reconvene the cross-party group in Cuba in the Scottish Parliament. One of my regrets is that we never managed, because we're not the UK Parliament, so we never managed to attract any assistance to get MSPs to Cuba or as part of a wider delegation. And I hope that in future that would be able to happen, because I think there's a lot to be learned for women MSPs, in fact for all MSPs, but particularly for women, and an actual official visit to Cuba would be really good in doing that. However, we have been really successful over the years in raising issues of the blockade and its impact on, for example, businesses who operate here and want to deal with Cuba, and we recognise the impact that that's had on women, who are often the ones who bear the most burden within the homes to deal with shortages and hardships that the blockade brings to all Cuban households. I think women in Britain have much in common with their sisters in Cuba. We all fight for equal rights and equal representation in the corridors of power. And in Britain, women in the labour and trade union movement strive for a society based on social justice, equality and a fairer redistribution of power and wealth, not only here, of course, but worldwide. And I think that aim can be helped by strengthening our links with our Cuban sisters, by rejecting global capitalism and joining in solidarity to call for a world where peace, justice and an end to poverty are the guiding principles for all. As sisters, as friends and comrades, we must pledge our ongoing support for the cause of democracy, human, civil and political rights everywhere in the world, and unite to call for an end to oppression and discrimination and exclusion of any kind. So I will just end with solidarity with Cuba and with our sisters in the FMC. Solidarity.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you. I've been told as well that Teresa also talks about women in national and local government positions in the long interview that she did. So if you want to know more about that, go look out for the full interview that when it appears on the YouTube channel later this week, and then it will sort of tie in with what you were saying at the beginning of your talk as well, because I think that will be really interesting. And there's also an article on the CSC website about the 60th anniversary, which discusses it as well. Before we move to questions, if we have time, I'm really pleased to invite Her Excellency Barbara Montalvo Alvarez, the Cuban ambassador, to say a few words, as I know she's been watching and being part of our event this evening. So you are very, very welcome, and we're very pleased to have you as part of the event this evening, Ambassador. Welcome. Are we unmuted? Can we just make sure that we've got you unmuted, Ambassador? There you go.
Okay, right now?
Yes, you're okay now, yes.
How can I say? Frankly, when Rob told me about the campaign was organizing this meeting, I was sure from the beginning that it would be of great interest. But this even exceeded my expectations. Memorable times have been evoked today. Sincere thanks for this opportunity to share with all of you. I'm grateful that the Cuban Women Federation's anniversary is commemorated in this way. All of you have been generous in assessing that what the Cuban Revolution has done in favor of women. And I know indeed it is not little, but I want you to know that in Cuba, our leaders, our authorities, the women, we are not completely satisfied because we know that there are new scenarios, new challenges, which must be accompanied by innovative ideas, maybe more ambitious goals for this to become a reality. So this just encourages us to keep going, and we cannot stop in our objective. Panelists with experience in gender, poverty eradication, racial discrimination, and scientific work have spoken. We know there cannot be a full emancipation of women if many other rights are not guaranteed. And social work will not be successful, or at least not be completely successful, if it does not include the rights of women. I was very moved by the testimony of Dr. Miriam Palacios, a professional, educated, and trained in Cuba, who later settled in this country where she lived with her family. But Miriam was part of that percent of the skilled labor force in Cuba quoted in this evening. And in a way, she continues to be. She also represents a Cuban nation and the advances in this field. And like her, there are many others here and around the world. And they are a result of that policy aimed to supporting the participation of the women in all spheres of political, economic, social, scientific, and cultural life in Cuba. For me, this meeting has been a tribute to Cuban women. And more than that, a tribute to Fidel, who always defended our rights and worked so hard for making them come through. I remember a phrase by José Martí that I would like to quote it today. Martí said, "When the cultured and virtuous woman anoints the work with the sweet honey of affection, the work is invisible." Congratulations, all of you, and many thanks for this beautiful and wonderful moment.
Thank you so much, and I'm glad you're here to join us for this beautiful and wonderful moment. I agree, it has been a really beautiful and wonderful moment. We are slightly short of time. We have had a couple of questions, but I'm going to just pick out One, to start with, I think we will probably only have time for this. And that the question I'm going to ask, and if each person would like to think about that, is, oh, I've sort of disappeared off your screen. I don't quite know how I've managed to disappear off your screen, but I'll keep talking. Is that what do you think are the greatest challenges facing Cuban women today? And we'll go to each of our speakers to think about what they think the greatest challenges facing Cuban women today are. And just we'll go, could we start with you, Medea? Is that all right?
Sure. Well, I think there are...
Oh, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you. You've got 2 minutes maximum to answer, and I'll have to interrupt you.
I think there are economic issues, and they're related to coronavirus, which a survey just showed that women in Cuba are more worried about it than men are. And it's not just whether they can continue to contain the spread, it's the economic fallout of this. Not having tourism is a major source of revenue. The attacks on the Cuban doctors overseas and the retraction of thousands of doctors now that there are conservative governments in Brazil, Ecuador, and Bolivia has been a major loss of income. The Venezuelan crisis has been reflected in the Cuban economy. And then I think a challenge of whether we're going to have 4 more years of Trump is going to make a big difference in the lives of Cubans. So those economic challenges, I think, are the most critical ones.
Thanks, Medea. Julie?
Hi, good evening. What do you do when you've got too many female leaders in the same space? My niece-in-law is actually currently studying medicine in Cuba. And because of the vast number of doctors that Cuba is successfully educating, the next steps in terms of her postgraduate specialism, etc., they are on she's currently on a scholarship that was given to other Caribbean islands to study medicine, but it's the next steps. Where do they seek employment after that? And as a science teacher, you know, I can agree that it's magnificent that so many women are going into STEM, but it's where do they seek employment afterwards, and whether we here in the UK and and European countries, not other anymore, can provide some employment for those young educated female graduates.
Thank you. And Elaine?
Sorry, thanks, Philippa. Yeah, obviously the COVID pandemic is an issue, and poverty and inequality caused by the blockade, which is also an issue in Scotland. We've seen a terrible, not of the blockade, of course, but we've seen poverty and inequality was rising before COVID, but now the rise in food banks, etc., has been has really increased, and job losses, and that will impact more on women. But I would like to just say, I think the one thing is making sure that Cuban women hold on to the representation that they have gained and don't take it for granted, because if you look at what happened in the Scottish Parliament in '99, and then you look at where we are now with women's representation, you know, you fight to get it, but you also have to fight to make sure that you keep it. And I think also the double workday that was mentioned earlier on is a challenge for women everywhere where we have paid jobs, but also the main caring responsibilities in the home. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Miriam?
Okay, I want one message, and I am asking all the women in Great Britain, in the world, to convene in this fight against the blockade. We need to be a big, massive force, in the same way that the Cubans were the 50% injured women of the revolution. We need that in the world. We need to stop the blockade. The United States cannot continue doing what it's doing, that is criminal, that is against our family, that is against of our children, we can stand up. If we have a sense of what a woman is in life and in our family, we can allow Americans to continue the blockade. I don't know what we are going to do, but we have to mobilize the world power of women. Thank you.
I like the idea of mobilizing the world power of women. And Ambassador, would you like to sum up for us?
The main challenge is for women and for all Cuban people, continue. Nothing stops us. Resist, work, advance, despise any aggression. And at the end, we shall overcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I think, like the rest of the people here in this meeting and those watching on YouTube, we are all inspired to continue and to mobilize that world power of women to do the things that we need to do. I think whenever you are involved in anything with Cuban women, Cubans and Cuban women, you always learn so much and you come away ready to do the campaigning and the jobs you need to do for social justice, whether it's with the Cubans or whichever social justice campaign you are involved in. So I'd like to thank you myself for what you have given us this evening, as well as congratulate you on the anniversary and send solidarity for that. I hope that everybody has enjoyed this evening's meeting as much as I have this evening, and it's given a real insight into how Cuban women have been part of that revolutionary process right from the very beginning. And clearly it would not have been nearly as successful if women had not been involved in it, fighting in the underground movement through to the literacy brigade, shaping the constitution, and playing a leading role in all areas of Cuban society. Now, of course, we, as ever, want to finish our meeting with a call to action. And I want to remind you to sign the petitions for the Nobel Peace Prize and for the US government to cease the blockade to allow medical emergency supplies to reach Cuba. And also, of course, if you are not yet a member of CSC, we would like to ask you to join. It comes as well as making sure that we are in solidarity with the Cubans, our Cuban friends. You also will receive a Cuba C magazine 4 times a year with updates from Cuba and the work of the campaigns. And there will be full reports of these online meetings too. This meeting will be available to watch and share on YouTube, and CSC will be sharing details of that on the website shortly. And do keep aware of what's happening in Cuba and future meetings by signing up to our updates and by visiting the Cuba Solidarity Campaign website or following them on Facebook or Twitter. And if you wish to receive notifications. And if you can afford to, please consider donating to the campaigns to help support the work that we do. Details of all the links will be on the screen at the end of this meeting. So the only thing I have left to do is to thank all our speakers tonight and all the viewers that we have on Zoom and YouTube, and especially the Federation of Cuban Women for joining us via YouTube, and to thank everybody for being part of this. In the film from the Literacy Museum, one of the participants talked about something that she carries with her all the time. And I think that is clear that the work of the Cuban women, they carry it with them all the time because they know how important and what an impact they've had. So taking that message with us, thank you so much for being part of this evening, and stay safe, look after yourselves, and go with solidarity for the Cubans and the work of the women in Cuba. And thank you very much for being part of this meeting this evening. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.